Josh Hodgson. He will be speaking about Germany's iGaming market in numbers. And Josh is the COO of H2 Capital Gambling. Please use the Slido app. Scan the QR code on your badge, and make sure to put in your questions that we can have Josh answered at the end of his presentation. Josh, please make it to the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Josh Hodgson. I'm the COO of H2 Gambling Capital. And today, we're going to be taking a deep dive look into the German iGaming market by numbers. Now, I say this every year when I present at these conferences, but please don't feel like you have to try and take notes, because I have a lot of data, which I'm going to throw at you in the next sort of 25 minutes or so. So please sit back and relax and just ask me for a copy of the slides after the presentation, if you want them. And I'll be happy to just send you the full presentation there with all the data included. So to start with, who are we? We're H2 Gambling Capital. We are the leading provider of market intelligence on the gambling industry. We've been the most trusted source of data for almost 20 years now. And we're an independent organization that works with regulators, governments, operators, and suppliers. And we provide data through our annual subscription service and through our one-to-one bespoke consulting service. So to keep our lawyers happy, I normally have to start with this disclaimer, but I actually feel like it's better summarized by this quote from the British statistician, George Box, who said that essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. So, with that in mind, I'm going to start by posing you a question. The German onshore iGaming market, is it growing or declining? So, to participate in the poll, please visit Slido and enter the event code #GIG. From there, select live polls, and at the top of your screen, choose whether you think the market is growing or declining. Just a quick point of clarification here. Today we'll be focusing on the iGaming market solely. So this is virtual slots and poker. So it doesn't include online sports betting or lottery. Don't worry, we have far more than enough to think about with just one product vertical alone. So we'll give it a few seconds to see how the answers come in. Seems so far that we have 81%, 82% saying that the onshore market is declining. So yeah, I think given a nice round number, we'll take that 80-20 split. So with that considered, we're going to have a look at a number of different sources of the reported data to see if they can provide us with a definitive answer to this question. So the first source of the data we'll be starting with today will be the monthly tax receipts that are reported by the Ministry of Finance. So these receipts show us how much tax is paid by licensed operators in the market, but also those who operated under interim permission and paid tax during the transitional period of the license. So from this data, we can see that since the regulation of the market in 2021, online tax receipts for online slots have more than halved, from 50 million euros per month to less than 20 million euros per month. This would indicate that the onshore market has been in significant decline. However, the next source we'll consider shows us a very different trend. This is the quarterly GGR data for online slots provided by the GGL in their most recent report. This data shows considerable growth since the start of the reporting period in Q1 2023, which indicates that the onshore market has been in a significant period of growth. So if we bring this data together from a unified point, so starting with the GGL's quarterly reporting in 2023, we can see that according to the tax data, online slot operators who paid tax saw a decline in GGR from around 160 million euros in Q1 2023 to 132 million in Q3 24. Then, by contrast, the GGL data shows that licensed slot operators saw an increase in GGR from 48 million in Q1 23 to 132 million in Q4 of 2024. So, we started with one very simple question, and we now have two seemingly completely conflicting answers. So maybe to make sense of this, we first need to consider how we even define an onshore market, and from that basis, how can we reconcile the tax data and the regulator's data? So typically that question is a very easy one. An onshore market consists of operators who hold a license within that market. However, the German market is slightly more complicated due to the fact that there was a transitional period in the first few years post-regulation where non-licensed operators were allowed to legally operate in the market provided they paid tax whilst they completed the licensing process. So with this in mind, the issue with only looking at the tax data is that it includes a group of operators that were classed as permitted, but then chose to exit the market during the transitional period and were never fully licensed. So the number of operators that are paying tax has decreased. So on those interim permissions, they then exited the process. So the fall in tax revenues could be a function of fewer operators paying tax, not necessarily a fall in GGR for those individual licensed operators. Our problem with only looking at the GGL's data in isolation is that it only represents the fully licensed operators in the market, so the increase in revenue can be due to an increase in the number of operators that gained a license over this period. So this shows that it could be, rather than an increase in revenues, just more operators with a license. So therefore, neither the GGL data on licensed operators nor the Ministry of Finance data on taxed operators can give us a definitive answer on the performance of the onshore market in Germany on its own. So I want to be very clear here in saying that we're not questioning the accuracy of either the tax data or the GGL's data. Both are inarguably correct, but the question we have to consider is which represents the trend in the market from the point of regulation more clearly. So depending on how we treat the transitional period, and depending on whether you view onshore operators as those that were permitted during the transitional period, or only fully licensed operators, your view on the market dynamics can change significantly. But with the effective end of the transitional period in Q1 of 2024, we can see that the tax data and the GGL's data starts to align perfectly. So going forward, 2024 is the first year where we have consistent reported data for any of these comparisons. However, it's essential that we understand the full picture of the trend in the onshore market from the point of regulation to assess the impact that the change in the market has had. To this end, we believe that the tax data is more representational of the onshore market performance through that transitional period. So in order to use this data, what we do is to estimate GGR, we apply the tax rate of 5.03% of stakes to the tax data. That gives us the total market turnover. We then use the implied GGR margin percentage from the GGL's reports to calculate an estimate for GGR, which we see in the chart here. So this trend shows an initial strong increase in the onshore revenue as operators entered the transitional period of the market, with GGR then beginning to decline into 2022 and 2023 before plateauing at a much lower level in 2024. We also feel this view is supported by other sources of data in the market, including web traffic tracking, so which shows us the number of visits and the time spent on sites in both the onshore and offshore markets. We reliably see that this tracks the GGR generation in other markets, and there's no reason to suspect it wouldn't in Germany. And we also look at the data that's released by a consistent sample of operators in the German market, pre-regulation and post-regulation. All of these operators that were fully licensed in the market when this was available showed a significant decline in the years following regulation. So that covers our view of the performance of the German onshore iGaming market post-regulation, but this is only one half of the picture. So in the next section of the presentation, we're going to assess what the data can tell us about the size and trends of the unlicensed offshore iGaming market in Germany. So when we're dealing with offshore activity, obviously there are no reported sources of this data, so we no longer have to worry about conflicting data, but we do have to worry about what we can use to accurately and consistently estimate the size of the offshore market. So what data do we use? So first, we identify the accessible offshore operators in the market through web searches and affiliate sites, and we then track the volume of customer activity going to these sites through web traffic data, affiliate traffic data, and web search data on a monthly basis. And this provides us with a detailed view of customer activity volume going to offshore sites. Then, to translate this into revenue, we apply a spend coefficient to the customer activity data. And to understand this, we undertake independent surveys of gamblers in each market so we can better track and understand player spend habits from low-spend players all the way up to very high-spend players. This metric is highly variable by market as it's sensitive to restrictions, which is a relationship that we're going to dive into shortly. So, as we've already covered, the revenue from the taxed or onshore operators, which is shown by the blue line, experienced a peak in 2022 as many operators joined the permitted transitional regime and has fallen ever since. Conversely, the revenue generated by the offshore untaxed market, here shown in orange, shows an initial drop at the start of the regulated market, but has shown rapid growth from 2023 onwards. This data is supported by a growth in both the number of unlicensed operators targeting the market and the amount of web traffic and affiliate traffic going to these operators instead of onshore operators. We have seen a slowdown in these trends over the past 10 months or so. So as such, our expectations for the offshore growth going forward are slower, but they are still very strong. So if we look at the data through the definition of the GGLs using only fully licensed operators, then actually the offshore trend stays much higher. So as the GGL reported the revenue of the first licensed operators in 2023, the peak of the licensed market revenue is much lower, but it did show growth between 2023 and 2024 as more operators became licensed. So depending on which definition you choose to use, whether you use onshore channelization, the percentage of the online gaming market generated by licensed operators has either fallen from around 68% to 24%, or has increased from 8% to 26% between 2022 and 2024. Without any changes to address this, we expect the channelization to continue to fall from this point going forward, and we expect it could reach as low as 20% by 2030. So whichever way you choose to define or look at the data, a channelization rate of between 20 and 25% for online gaming is one of the lowest of any regulated market in Europe and the world. So in the final section of my presentation, we're going to consider the question of why. To answer this, we're going to explore the impact of 3 key market variables on player behavior and therefore ultimately on onshore market success. These variables have been touched on by many speakers before me today, and they are the attractiveness, awareness, and accessibility. So starting with the attractiveness, what do I mean by this? So do the regulations in the market allow licensed operators to offer products that are as attractive as what unlicensed operators are offering? Based on independent player surveys that we've conducted across a range of markets across Europe and the world, some of the key factors for players that come up time and time again are the competitiveness of odds and jackpots, the game types and the products that are available, and the ability to stake desired amounts as well as bonuses and welcome offers. So when restrictions in a market stop licensed operators from offering products that are attractive to players, those players simply find an unlicensed operator who can. Next, the awareness refers to a licensed operator's ability to communicate to players in that market that they are in fact licensed and abiding by regulations within the given market. The results of player surveys again show that the single most important factor for players in choosing who to bet with is the brand awareness. So when the advertising of licensed operators is overly restricted or even banned in some markets, it becomes almost impossible for players to know if they are playing on the site of a responsible licensed operator or a completely unlicensed one. They'll simply bet with the one that they know. This works in the reverse also. So by effectively banning and blocking advertising from unlicensed operators, it can help clear the muddy waters of who you should and should not be betting with. Finally, accessibility. So what I mean by this is how easy is it for a player to access, fund, and withdraw money from a licensed operator versus an unlicensed operator. There are two sides to every coin, and it's not enough to only place restrictions on onshore operators and do nothing to combat the unlicensed operators. So by making it easier for players to access the sites of licensed operators and facilitate fast, secure, and reliable transactions, then you remove the barriers and friction from their play. By making it harder for players to access unlicensed sites, it makes it hard to fund accounts with unlicensed operators, and it increases the barriers and friction points, which become significant issues for players and reduces the attraction of using an offshore operator. So, considering the German market specifically within this framework, there is one variable in particular that we feel is a key factor in causing players to leave the licensed market in favor of the unlicensed one. So in terms of accessibility, the GGL are able to block payments to unlicensed operators as well as the domains, and whilst complete IP blocking is not possible as yet, these measures do serve to make it harder for players to use offshore operators. So in terms of awareness, licensed operators in the German market are able to advertise and offer bonuses and welcome offers to German players, whereas unlicensed operators are strictly prohibited from any form of advertising. However, when we consider the attractiveness of the products that licensed operators are able to offer, there are several factors that make it almost impossible for them to compete with unlicensed operators. Despite attempts to combat the offshore market from a prohibitory standpoint, without a reason to stay in the onshore market, players can easily find ways to sidestep the hurdles and access the type of play they want with the operators that will happily allow them to play in the way that they want to. So in the next few slides, we're going to assess some of the key restrictions to licensed operators and how they stand in the way of keeping players within the regulated and protected onshore market. So what these slides represent are our insights into what certain regulations have had on onshore channelization in other markets. So I want to point out that we're not lobbyists here. We're not making recommendations of what we think the GGL should or shouldn't do. What we're doing is providing our perspective from what we have seen in other European jurisdictions and how they've had a negative impact on the regulated market channelization. So to start with, we're going to consider the expected impact of the imposition of the £5 maximum stake for online slots in the UK, which came into effect in April of this year. So our analysis showed that there is an estimated 22% of slot stakes which exceed the £5 limit in the UK. So whilst a considerable portion of the market will be unaffected by the change, it's expected to disproportionately impact higher spend players who are not happy to just adjust their time played simply to increase the spend by playing more. So higher spend players are more likely to seek out offshore operators who will be happy to accept whichever stake they choose to wager. As a result, we expect a 78% year-on-year increase in offshore slot revenue this year as a result. The impact will not be isolated to slot games, because we see that players who migrate some of their play to offshore operators are much more likely to migrate other products and play like betting as well. So in Germany, the impact is likely to be significantly more than what we're seeing here in the UK as a result of the maximum slot being much lower at €1. So whilst there's no reported data on the percentage of stakes over this threshold, we estimate it will be considerably higher than the 22% above £5 as in the UK. And therefore, the impact will be to a much bigger portion of players who will look to offshore operators to continue playing in the way that they want to. Next, we expect that the 5.03% tax on iGaming stakes has impacted the German onshore market significantly. To isolate the impact of a tax on stakes compared to a tax on GGR, we can look at the difference between the onshore market in Ontario, which regulated shortly after Germany itself did, and Ontario opted to tax GGR at 20%. The average return to player percentage of onshore operators in Ontario is around 95%, which is around the industry average. So if a licensed German operator offered this rate, they would pay over 100% of their revenue in tax, and as such, they are forced to lower the RTP percentage and make their games far less attractive to players. Indeed, the average RTP of a licensed German operator offering slot games is around 88.5%. By allowing German operators to set GGR margins at what they believe to be more viable, we can expect a significant increase in channelization. This will be done by changing the basis of tax from stakes to GGR. As we can see, this has absolutely worked in Ontario. So Ontario experienced 232% growth on the pre-regulation levels for the onshore market, whereas the German onshore slot market has experienced a 63% decline over the same time period. One data point that highlights the importance of pricing and RTPs, we looked at independent player surveys which found 22% of players from European markets said that pricing and odds was the most important factor for them in choosing which operator to play with. By handicapping the RTP that onshore operators can offer, the attractiveness of their products is significantly less than that of the offshore, and as such, the channelization rate will suffer. Finally, we're going to consider the impact of the significant restrictions on online table games in Germany. So if we look at the breakdown of iGaming GGR in the Netherlands, we see that table games, in the form of RNG-based table games and live dealer games, account for 18% of the total onshore GGR. In 2025, this corresponded to 200 million euros, or roughly 50% of the size of the German onshore iGaming market. Again, based on the results of our own player surveys, we see that 21% of high-spend players say that the most important factor for them in choosing an operator is a selection of games that they offer. By not being able to widely offer this form of gaming, licensed operators are at a significant disadvantage to their unlicensed competitors who provide a full range of game types. So to summarize the key takeaways from what we've discussed today before going into questions, prior to 2024, we do not have a sole reliable source of reported data from the GGL or the Ministry of Finance to track the onshore market from the point of regulation. So if we analyze all of the reported data from multiple sources, it indicates that the onshore market performance has declined significantly from that point of regulation. We also can see that the iGaming channelization rate in Germany is at 22% and declining. Finally, it's our view that one of the most significant reasons for this are the restrictions that are imposed on the onshore market that are preventing licensed operators from competing with their unlicensed counterparts, which is resulting in players leaving the regulated onshore space to try their luck in the offshore market. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you. Thank you.